Hello, this is John Guerra, and I'm going to show you how to create a visualization using Crossfilter and DC.js. The first thing I want to explain to you what Crossfilter is. It is this really nice library in which you can add a complex dataset with many dimensions, and then you can filter by each one of those dimensions, and then come up with subsets that recompute very quickly on the browser, which allows you to do this type of visualization. Right here in the demo, this one was made using D3 alone, but I'm going to explain how to do that using DC.js. Well, the first thing we need to start explaining this is to have some data. So I'm going to use a specific data set that I just prepared using the BAST challenge, the visualization challenge of this year, 2017. Actually, you can use it for applying to the challenge and sending your submission. So what I'm going to do is that I just went to my GitHub, and then I'm going to clone that repository. So I'm going to use a git clone in here of that repository. And if you guys see in here in the Minichallenge, I have the data and some of the description files. I also added the JS libraries for each one of the elements that we are going to be using. So this just cloned my repository. So let me get into there, and then open Sublime in there. And then we can see the files, and then what I'm going to do is just inside the Minichallenge, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to save that as my index.html. So when I do that, I'm going to use a simple boilerplate, and I'm going to say this is a BAST 2017 Minichallenge 1. Okay, so let's add some simple things in here. Same thing, BAST 2017 Minichallenge. And then I'm going to include my libraries. So the first library that I need to include is Crossfilter. As you can see in here, that library is included here in the package, in the repository I just created. So it's crossfilter.js, and then I need a couple more. I need D3, and sadly this only works with D3 version 3. Looking forward to having one for D3 version 4. So with that, then we have the 3 libraries. And then let's try to see if all of this is working. Let me get into the Minichallenge folder and start an HTTP server. So now I have one running in that port. So I can go into, that one in there. And then I have the BAST Minichallenge. So let me open here the development consoles that you can get from clicking here on the menu options, and then developer tools. And then if everything is working correctly, I should have D3, Crossfilter, and DC running. So it all looks good. So let's start loading our data. So after loading all of this, then I'm going to create a new script. And inside there, I'm just going to do a D3 CSV call that is going to be an asynchronous call to get the data. And then I'm going to use this one in here, that it's my data that I already have compressed because it's about 10 megabytes, so it could be quite long. Then I'm going to add a callback function. And then inside that callback function, whenever our data is ready, then we can start first checking if we have any errors. Then we should show them and then stop the execution. But if not, then what I can do is just to print that data. That could take a long time, but let's see what we get in here. So if I refresh this, so here we go. So we have the data, and then actually here we have that as a one variable, and if I look at that, it's actually like 171,000 rows of data. Okay, so the next thing I do is right after getting the data is that I'm going to create my cross filter of the data. So for doing that, the only thing you need to do is to create an object of Crossfilter, and then you pass a CSV file, and as long as you don't have errors in the data, you should get something like this. Okay. Then the very next thing I'm going to do is to group all of my data. And then for that, I'm going to use a function of Crossfilter called group all. and that will allow me to see how many records do I have and start working with the data. So the nice thing about D3, or actually of Crossfilter, sorry, is that we can actually, and then we can actually search the data by different dimensions. So, but the first thing we have to do is just to create that one in there. So to show you that it's working, I'm going to insert a breakpoint here. So you open in the console, you go into sources. Then I'm looking at my index file since my JavaScript is inside the HTML. Then I'm going to put a breakpoint in there. So when I go and stop that, then I can execute that line. And then if you guys look at this object, then you have different functions like dispose, reduce sum, and things like that. And the one I just want to see is how many records do I have, and that shows me my 171,000 records. Same thing goes with the NDX, that it's kind of like my basic dimension. You can see what is the object, and then that one has options for adding elements or reducing elements or creating dimensions, and that's what we are going to do next. So the very first thing I'm going to do is that if you guys take a look here, this is a very small slice of my data. Then let me actually copy at least a couple of these lines in here just to have a reference of what the data looks like. And then let's comment this out. So I have timestamp, card ID, card type, and gate name. I forgot to mention, sorry, that this data shows example data set of a test site in which we have information of what cars are entering into the facilities at what time and what type of car is that. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is that if you guys look in here, we have this car type, and that car type corresponds to these 4s in here. So I want to analyze those. So I'm going to use a car type dimension, and that one is just going to be a new dimension of the with using NDX. And the function to access that, I just need to give it an accessor. It's just going to be something like return d dot, and then I just need the car type, and because of that I have to use brackets because it has a dash in there. Okay. Then the nice thing about this is that I can create another one, and this one is going to be, for instance, for the gate name. So let's start by adding these two dimensions. So I have car type and I have gate name. Okay, so when I do that, let me return to here, and then I rerun this code, and then I have my breakpoint, so I'm going to execute these 4 lines. And then if we look at the car type dimension, this one has many functions, and remember that we can see what is the total number of elements by using the group all that we created. And this tells us that we have 171,000 elements. Now, what I'm going to do is that on my dimension, I'm going to filter only those that correspond to the type car type 2. When we do that, if I look at the number of elements, I only have 40,199 car types. Now, this is an interesting thing because the whole idea of Crossfilter is that I can filter through one of more dimensions. So if, for instance, I want to see only those that are entering entrance 3, then I can also do that by saying gate dimension, and then I filter by that one. And when I do that, then I see that only 2,000 cars actually, or 2 entrances were made by car types of dimension of type 2 through entrance 3. Now, the nice thing is that I can, for instance, remove one of those dimensions in here using the filter all elements, and then the only one that is remaining is the one inside the gate name. And then if I look at how many I have in here, then then I have 8,000 of those. Okay. Now the next thing that I would like to do is, for instance, and actually let me remove all the filters in here. Here we go. Then the next thing I want to do is that I just want to see, for instance, all the car types and what is the aggregated value for each one of those. So what I can do is that I could get my car type dimension, then I can group them, and then this is going to compute what is the total number of elements in there, and then I can save that as car type group. and put that in here. And then if I use my car type group, here is my element. Then I can say, show me all the elements in there. And then it shows me this object. And each one of those will contain a key that is one of the type of the cars. And then is how many instances it found in there. So it has one for this, the ones I found for 2, and so on and so forth. So let's add that code in here. So I'm going to have a car type group, and that is just going to be my car type dimension dot group. And by default, it is aggregating, just counting how many elements are in there, but you can use any other type of aggregation you want to compute, just by using a function called reduce or reduce sum. So I'm going to replace this by gate name, and then I have these 2 elements, and that's all the information I need to start analyzing. Now, to start visualizing this, I can use a library called DC.js. And DC.js is a dimensional charting library that actually works very nicely with Crossfilter and allows you to build all of these nice dashboards in which you can add all the elements and have all the slice and dicing, and especially brush and linking between the different elements in the dashboard. So you can select ranges, or you can select specific elements. So what I'm going to do in here is that I'm actually going to open my development tools in here, because I want to steal some of these elements, or actually reuse will be a better word. So I'm going to use the style sheets they have in here. So I'm just going to, and sorry for getting everything in the same folder, I'm going to save that as DC CSS and just copy all of that in there. And that is just for the style sheet of all the charts. So I can just add that in here. So I can add it here, for instance, before the body inside the head. So I can add a link, and then it's going to be DC CSS. Okay. Now the next thing is that I need to create my chart. So I'm going to use a new chart that is going to be called car type. Okay, and that's a div, and that's going to contain my car type. And the next thing I want to do is start creating my charts. So for creating my chart, the first thing I'm going to do is to create a global variable called car type chart. And that is going to be a row chart of the library DC. And then that is going to be rendered in the car type ID. That is the one I just created out here. Okay, so, and that's what I'm using hash, because I'm using the ID. Okay, the very next thing I want to do is that the car type chart, I need to assign the data to it. So I'm going to say the dimension it uses is the car type dimension, and then the group it uses is the car type group. And that's pretty much it. I'm just going to say in here that DC should render all the charts. And let's see if we can make this work. So I'm going to go back here to my code, and then run it again. And voila, we have initial chart. Then I think because we have all of that CSS styling, is that I can select different elements, and we can see how is that going to affect the other charts in a minute. So let me add another chart. In this case, it's going to be the gate name chart. And then I'm going to create another variable. It's going to be just the same thing, but instead of the car type, it's going to be the gate name. And this one, it's also going to be a row chart, and that's because we have data that it's ordinal or categorical. Otherwise, we will have used a bar chart. And then we just need to create another one in here. Gate name chart, and the dimension for this one is, guess what? Gate name dimension, and then the group for that one is going to be my gate name group. Okay, so when I do that, then let's see if this works. We should have, oh, I have an error, 29 here. Here we have another chart, and if you see, this is almost not legible, and the reason for that is that I have too many charts in there. So I have two options. So either I make this chart bigger, and I say, for instance, that it has 800 pixels of height, and then I can actually start seeing them. Or the other thing I can do is to filter the elements and only show the top. So there is a nice trick I found online that basically, if you say here that the data is, and you pass a function, and then you say, I'm going to use the group and only use the top 10 elements, then we should have two charts, and these are the top 10 gates of that type of cars. So the nice thing in here is that if I select one of these, you see all of the other charts regenerate and refreshes. So I can click on each one of those and create different filters, and the rest of the data will update, showing just the results that fix that. So in order to, if we don't want this axis to stay fixed, then what we can do is that we can use a command called elastic x, I think it is, I hope, and then we can say we want both of them to update the x-axis whenever I click. So when I do that, you can see that it actually updated, and then I want to see only instances of car type 3 with gate 7, and then you see it updates each one of those. Maybe I want 2 gates, or I only want this gate in here, or I want gates 1, this type of car, or I only want this type of car. So you can actually see each one of those. So this is in trans 0, and then you see how many of those you get, okay? So actually I can remove that. So the next thing is that it will be nice to see how many elements, or what elements do I have selected. So actually DC.js has nice options for that. So I'm going to copy that from the demo that they have in here. So I'm going back to their demo here, and then on the development tools, if I look into their index, and then let's say take a look at this element in here and inspect that, then, or actually, sorry, in the sources, if I keep scrolling, you see that here they have a bootstrap row, and then they have, this is the total number, the table, and then this is each one of the charts. So I'm going to copy one of these ones. So especially this element in here, and what it has in there is nothing very complicated. It just has a title, and then it has a placeholder for the chart that is this clear fix in here. So I'm going to say this is my gate type, oh sorry, car type. And then what it does is that it's also adding a button called reset, and it starts not displaying them, and it shows a range. In this case, I'm going to say selected because it's not really a range. And then here is the name of the chart that is going to be filtering. So in this case, it's going to be the car type chart. And whenever they click on that, we want to filter all of the elements, that is to clear all the filters and to redraw all the elements, okay? And then I'm going to duplicate this thing in here, and by doing that, I'm going to change this not to be the car type, but the gate name, and the same thing goes here, gate name, okay? And let's see how that looks. Let's go back to my code. Here we go, and there is loading. Now we have these things, and when I select, it says it selected one. I can reset these elements, and I can say selected that gate with this one in here, reset and reset. So the final thing I want to show you is that if you look at the example here, is that they have a very lovely table in here with also the total number of elements selected. So I can select a specific range, and then they tell me how many they have selected, and they actually can show me the dates. So I'm also going to copy that, and that's the one we hovered over a little bit ago. And here we just have to look for, here is a chart, here is actually it. So here is the table, and it might not look very well, but you guys can fix that using Bootstrap or whatever CSS that you want to use. And then the ideas that I have here is my chart 1, here is my chart 2, and then here is actually my count of elements and my table, okay? So pretty much I have a DC table count here and then a DC table here. Okay, so then let me go, where is my code? Here. Let me go to my code. I'm going to create 2 more global variables, and then it is that this one is going to be called bis count, and it's just a DC data count, if I'm not mistaken. And then I'm going to use the DC data count. And then the other one in here is a vis table. And this one is going to be a data table. And the data count is going to be here, in this case, my data table. So now notice that I'm using dot now because I'm selecting by class, just following their leading there. So let me add the semicolon in here, and then we are going to do the same thing. So the first one is that I'm going to use vis count, and that one also needs to have a dimension. So since we are going to do it for all the overall, so we are going to use the general crossfilter, and then we need the group, and in this case we are going to use the group all that we got here. So it's these 2 elements, and that should show us the total number of elements. And finally, I'm going to use my table, and that table is going to use a new dimension that I actually haven't created yet. So actually, let me create that one before. And this dimension is going to be a date dimension. So I'm going to group things by date. So in this case, it's going to be a date dimension. And the attribute name for that, it's called timestamp. Okay. Now, timestamps come in this format, so I need to convert that before. So I'm going to do here, right after I receive the data, I'm going to do a for each on my data. And the only thing I'm going to do is just to replace the timestamp with the value that you get for creating a new date with that one. Conveniently, this data comes in a format that you can just pass it in here and it will parse it automatically. And this will be now date time object from JavaScript. So now I have my dimension, and same thing as before, we need also a group for that. So I'm going to change this to be only the date, and then I have my date dimension and my date group. Okay, so going back to the bis table, then I'm going to do with my date dimension, and then with my group, it's going to be my date group. Okay, the next thing we need is to specify what are the columns we are going to display. So we have the column timestamp, we also have the column car ID, and I say car ID, and then car type, and if I'm not mistaken, gate name. Okay, and those are the columns that we want to show. And let's see, here we are. So timestamp, car ID, car type, and gate name. I think I'm missing something in there, but let's try how this goes. So if I show this one, now we have this selected out of records, and it's showing how many I have in there, and then it says here, I'm getting an error. So I think I need to copy some of the code that the nice people from the DC.js have. And then the idea is that I'm going to use to find my table. Here I have the data table, blah, blah. So they call it here the stack. And then here in the group, yes. So the nice thing is that tables, actually the groups in tables are different. So instead of, and you can actually see here, there is an explanation for that. The idea is when you do tables, you usually don't use groups, but a closure on the grouping function. So in this case, we are grouping by month, and then by month of the year, and then we are actually processing that in there. But our attribute is not called DD, instead it's called timestamp. Okay, so let's see if we can get that to work. And then when I do that, it's loading, and then the format is not the best. So, but the nice thing is that I can select, and then you see only the elements that include that type of car. If I filter by this, you can see that it's resetting this. And here you have how many records you have. You can eliminate all the elements and actually see all the changes in there. You can add more different charts for each one of the other variables, but I think I can conclude my demo right now. So thank you very much.